In the winter of 1943, 91,000 German soldiers surrendered after months trapped in Stalingrad. The cold, hunger, and Soviet encirclement had destroyed any possibility of escape. Wehrmacht officers were immediately separated. Troop prisoners were led in columns to improvised camps. Along the way, thousands fell from exhaustion. Those who remained alive faced transfers in closed trains without food or shelter. Inside the camps, forced labor was daily. Diseases spread uncontrollably. Deaths exceeded the lists. Beatings were part of the system. Each night, the barracks became emptier. With the passing of the years, only a tiny fraction managed to return. Some were never registered. Others died without anyone noting their name. Official figures spoke of 5,000 survivors. The rest disappeared in trains, ditches, or snow. What happened to all those men who surrendered at the end of the siege? The morning of the 21st of June, 1941 began quietly. Many Berlin citizens went out to Potsdam to spend the day in the gardens. Others swam on the beaches of Wannsee or Nikolassee. In the cafes, jokes about Rudolf Hess's flight to Scotland had been replaced by rumors of an attack against the Soviet Union. Some still believed that Stalin would cede Ukrainian territory at the last minute. Meanwhile, at the Soviet embassy in Berlin, officials remained at their posts. Moscow demanded urgent answers about German military movements on the border. The first secretary, Valentin Berezhkov, called the German Foreign Ministry, but was told that Ribbentrop was out and Weizsäcker was nowhere to be found. Throughout the day, Moscow continued sending increasingly alarming messages. The Kremlin had already received more than 80 alerts. German aviation had crossed the border 39 times in a single day. In the early morning of the 22nd of June, Soviet representatives were summoned to Ribbentrop's office. Upon arrival, they were handed the declaration of war. The German invasion had begun. At midday, Molotov announced the news by radio. The country was already under attack without prior warning. In Stalingrad, still far from the front, the message was a blunt blow. Many students volunteered. Reservists reported immediately, convinced that victory would come soon. At the Technical University, they marked a map with flags, hoping to advance quickly into German territory. The German machinery did not stop. The army advanced towards the Volga without major obstacles. The cities fell one after another. In August of 1942, the Sixth Army crossed the Don. By the end of that month, they were already fighting inside Stalingrad. The city became a field of ruins. The German troops, confident, awaited the final blow. But the Soviet counterattack arrived in November with Operation Uranus. Zhukov's troops completely surrounded the Sixth Army. With the harshest winter, the encirclement was completely closed. More than 200,000 people were trapped: soldiers, auxiliaries, drivers, administrators. Temperatures fell below 30 degrees below zero. Supplies were scarce. The cold air, hunger, and diseases made resistance impossible. Air supply lines failed from the beginning. The command was isolated. All exit and entry were blocked. Soldiers slept in frozen basements or snow-covered trenches. The wounded piled up in unheated posts. Amputations were performed without anesthesia. Bread was distributed in rations of 50 grams. In some places, cases of cannibalism appeared. Bodies remained frozen where they fell. The smell of gangrene and typhus permeated the air. Letters that managed to get out spoke of desperation, hunger, and abandonment. Morale disappeared. Officers tried to maintain order. Some soldiers continued digging positions. Others collapsed onto the snow. Communications with Berlin were sporadic. It was ordered to resist unconditionally. Surrender was forbidden. Each division had to fight to the last man. The nearby Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian troops were annihilated or disbanded. The encirclement grew smaller each week. During December, reports arrived of complete units running out of ammunition and food. Some German soldiers tried to escape by crossing the ice, but were shot by Soviet snipers or by their own commanders. The High Command already knew that no route remained open. Divisions were reduced to hundreds of men. Diseases spread unchecked. Typhus and dysentery killed more than bullets. The horses were devoured one by one. Then they ate the leather, boot soles, even paper. Some soldiers cooked broths with sawdust and snow. In the center of the encirclement, the headquarters still maintained radio contact. Reports spoke of shattered units, without officers, with soldiers unable to move. Messages were sent asking for help. None were answered. Christmas arrived with soldiers frozen in their positions. Trees were improvised with dry branches. Some sang hymns. Several remained motionless. In January, Soviet troops began to press from all fronts. The city was a cemetery. The houses were ruins. The factories were destroyed. Hospitals did not function. Ambulances were dragged by men. On the 22nd of January, the enemy general offered terms of surrender. The proposal was not answered. A direct order from above was expected. The answer was clear: continue resisting. The final encirclement closed on the 26th of January. The Sixth Army was divided into two pockets. On the 30th of January, a symbolic rank promotion was given. The intention was clear: to die or kill themselves. The action was avoided. On the 31st of January, he surrendered in his headquarters in the city's basement. The remaining units did the same in the following days. Around 91,000 people were taken prisoner: soldiers, officers, doctors, nurses, administrators. Of those, fewer than 6,000 would return years later. Those who remained alive were grouped in rows and taken into custody. They walked among debris, crossed destroyed buildings, dragging their feet. Some fainted and were set aside. Others fell without getting up again. They marched without receiving water or food. The ground was covered with dirty snow. The air was dense and icy. Many had gone without sleeping or eating for days. Some murmured senselessly. Their clothes were in rags. On the walls appeared messages written with charcoal. Some said names, others just dates. Upon reaching a ruined building, a column was stopped. A Soviet officer spoke loudly. No one understood the language. The officers were separated from the soldiers. The wounded were loaded onto sleds. Those who could not walk were dragged by their comrades. One by one, the groups were directed eastward. They crossed burned villages, fields covered with ice, broken bridges. In the first days, hundreds died. Without food or shelter, they slept outdoors. Some German soldiers peeled tree bark to chew something. At a railway crossing, one group was joined with hundreds of other captives. Some shouted names. Others remained in silence. Several had lost fingers to frostbite. One was seen walking without boots, with rags tied to his feet. He moved with extreme difficulty. He stopped and fell sideways. No comrade picked him up. The guards hurried the others with shouts. Distant shots were heard. No one reacted. They only kept walking, step by step, towards a station where closed wooden wagons awaited. The train gates opened. The soldiers were pushed inside. More than 60 were crammed per wagon. The space lacked benches or light. Barely one bucket in a corner. The journey lasted several days. On the ground, some bodies remained motionless. Upon arrival, they were unloaded with pushes. They walked towards a field surrounded by high fences. One watchtower observed them from above. Upon entering the camp, the prisoners were taken directly to an open area where they had to stand for hours. Snow covered the ground. The cold was constant. No additional clothing was distributed. Some had their feet wrapped in bandages. Others trembled with their arms crossed. The Russian guards observed them without speaking. A Soviet officer pointed with his finger and separated some men. Everyone ignored the reason. Some were taken to a barracks, others did not return. The facilities were minimal. There were wooden huts without windows. The interior was dark with a thick smell. The mattresses were old sacks. The roofs let the wind through. In a corner, buckets with frozen excrement were piled up. The turns to go to the well were controlled. Many remained on the road. Some fainted along the way. Those who ended up on the ground were unintentionally stepped on by the others. During the first day, no food was distributed. On the second, they delivered a watery mixture with pieces of boiled cabbage. One prisoner vomited upon tasting it. Others ate in silence. The bread ration was smaller than one hand. It had to be kept for hours. Some hid it in their boots. One group was punished for exchanging food. They were taken to one room without windows. Upon leaving, they walked with difficulty. One was bleeding from the nose. The rules were strict. They shouted the names in the morning. When one did not respond, the entire group received less food. Some pretended to be alive while they had already died. A man was propped against the wall with his eyes open. Another moved the corpse's head during the count. The guards did not react or simply ignored the scene. At night, they dragged them outside and left them at the foot of the fence. Upon starting the second week, the work began. They had to move wood, dig trenches, or clear paths. The weather did not matter. Some fainted with the shovel in hand. Those who remained on the ground were beaten. One German soldier refused to move. He received kicks until he stopped breathing. No one protested. The line kept walking. In one ravine, they found remnants of uniforms. Someone whispered that those who did not last were buried there. Letters were forbidden. One could only write if the Soviets authorized it. Some tried to send messages on hidden papers. When they were discovered, the prisoners were made to kneel in the snow for hours. One of them remained frozen in that position. The others avoided looking at him. Punishment was part of the day. Singing was also forbidden. Even humming brought blows as a sanction. During the confinement, the prisoners spoke among themselves in whispers. They shared stories of the battles. Some recounted what they had seen in Stalingrad. One said he had buried his friend with his hands. Another spoke of an improvised hospital in one cellar. A third remembered that an officer had shot himself in front of his men. Each story was listened to without comment. No one wanted to remember more than necessary. Diseases increased every day. Typhus spread quickly. One ward was isolated. The sick were transported in carts. Some shouted for help. Others simply allowed themselves to be dragged. One prisoner recounted that one of the German doctors tried to cure with boiled bandages. There were no medicines. The Soviets allowed water in buckets. At night, choked coughs were heard. In the morning, the bodies were removed, wrapped in blankets. Food began to become even scarcer. Some hunted rats inside the barracks. They cooked them with water and distributed them in equal parts. One day, they found a dead horse near the camp. Several prisoners jumped on the corpse to tear off meat. The guards shot into the air. Even so, some took pieces under their clothes. A man was discovered with one bone hidden in his coat. They hung him by the wrists as punishment. The winter continued. The boots broke. The feet bled. The hands were covered with sores. Some German soldiers began to talk to themselves. One believed he was at his home. Another was looking for his mother. Groups of help were formed. One cared for the other. Some shared their pan. Others just waited for the end of the day. At the entrance of the camp, the numbers written with chalk marked those who did not survive. In March, a new group of prisoners arrived. They came from another sector. Many were worse. Some without fingers, others without underwear. One had lost the ability to speak. The group was mixed with the previous ones. Food continued not to increase. The barracks became more crowded. They slept tightly packed, without moving. One soldier died and no one noticed until morning. They had used him as a pillow without knowing it. During a subsequent selection, a Soviet officer looked at their faces. He separated a few. They said they were going to a better place. None reappeared. A prisoner with experience in Russia said they were being taken to harsher labor camps. Those who remained looked at each other without speaking. Each day there were fewer. Turns to collect bodies were more frequent. In 1 week, more than 200 were counted. One of the prisoners wrote on a piece of wood, "Here lived soldier number 43,000, he is no longer here." Another marked lines on the wall, one for each lost comrade. When there was no more room, he started on the ceiling. The barrack walls were full of names, dates, memories. In the midst of the silence, the letters were the only thing left. With the thaw, the Soviets began to separate small groups of prisoners. Each one was assigned a different destination, without explanation. There was talk of transfers to camps with other tasks. No one asked questions. The selected ones were allowed to wash their faces and change their clothes if they found others among the piles of the dead. Then they were taken walking to a station where they were put into closed wagons. Some had gone days without eating before the journey. The trains were slow to depart. Inside the wagons there was only one ventilation slit, more than 50 men per space. No one had room to lie down. The urination bucket filled in a few hours. The air became thick. Those who fell to the ground remained there. When the train stopped, the guards opened the door and asked for the bodies to be taken down. No one uttered a word. They just threw the corpses onto the hard ground. In the new camps, the environment was more inhospitable. Some facilities were wooden camps abandoned by Soviet soldiers. Others were just broken tents. The men slept on boards. Work began at dawn. They cut trees, transported logs, quarried stone or dug trenches. Food continued to be scarce, a clear soup and a piece of black bread. If they delayed in their task, they received shouts or blows. In one of the groups, one soldier died after being trapped under a log. His comrades tried to move him, but the guards ordered them to continue with the load. The body was covered with snow. No one saw him again. Each week more deaths were reported. Sometimes the name was not said, only the number they wore on their jacket. The lists shortened rapidly. Hunger, cold and infections continued. Some German soldiers tried to survive by exchanging pieces of cloth, needles made from nails, or threads pulled from blankets. They sewed their clothes in silence. One found a broken spoon and used it as a knife to divide the rations. Solidarity was short-lived. In one camp, one man killed another for a piece of bread. The guards did not intervene. They only took the body later. As the months passed, extreme thinness was common. Some could no longer stand. They walked hunched over, with their ribs showing under their skin. Their shoes were strips of cloth tied with wire. Their feet were covered in sores. Several lost fingers due to frostbite. The smell inside the barracks was a mixture of sweat, dried blood, pus and smoke. Most had gone weeks without bathing. In certain camps, the Soviets conducted quick medical checks. An officer with a notebook checked the prisoners. If they were too weak, they were separated. They were loaded onto trucks and taken away without explanation. They never returned. A former German nurse believed they were transferred to disposal areas. There were no official reports or burials. They simply disappeared from the group. Those who remained tried to appear strong. One painted his face with mud to avoid being separated. During a transfer north, the trains took more than 1 week to arrive. Upon disembarking, the prisoners were forced to walk several kilometers through deep snow. Some collapsed and were dragged. In the new camp, temperatures dropped more than before. Firewood was insufficient. They burned anything: pieces of benches, remnants of doors, even old notebooks. The work there consisted of opening drainage ditches. The ground was frozen. The shovels bounced off. Their arms hurt after a short time. A Soviet guard watched in silence. He only spoke to order a change of pace or to sanction those who stopped. A German soldier collapsed unconscious. The group surrounded him. No one moved until the relief arrived. The man remained unconscious until the end. In one corner of the camp, the prisoners improvised a wall with stones. On it, they engraved names. Each line represented one dead person. They used nails, rusty knives, or sharp stones to write. The wall grew. One wrote at the base. Here are remembered those who were left without a number. No one erased it. Neither the guards nor the officers said anything. It was the only thing that was not touched. Over time, the few surviving German officers were forced into tasks equal to the rest. They dug with their hands if there were no tools. One of them wrote on his belt, "I used to give orders, now I await the end." Some kept hidden insignia, others buried them. The hierarchy had already disappeared. Only surviving one more day mattered. Conversations were brief. They talked about food, the weather, or pains. Rations continued to decrease. Some cooked roots or pieces of leather. One time a dog appeared near the camp. They caught it and divided it into portions. One refused to eat. He died that same night. One of his companions wrote on an old napkin, he did not know how to chew hunger. The paper was kept in a cardboard box with other notes. The box disappeared weeks later. At a certain point, a group of prisoners arrived from another front. They came from the Caucasus. They were even thinner. Some remained silent. One covered his head with a blood-stained scarf. Another walked leaning on a stick. As they mixed with the previous ones, stories were told in low voices. One said his camp had only 1 cup of soup daily. Another recounted that in his barracks everyone slept sitting up due to lack of space. In one of the furthest camps, an inspection by Soviet delegates was carried out. The prisoners were ordered to wash with snow, shave and hide the sick. The visitors took photographs. They handed out some blankets. Then they left. Days later, the camp returned to its usual rhythm. The blankets disappeared. The photos were used in propaganda posters. The prisoners never knew what the texts said. Towards the winter of 1946, the number of living prisoners had fallen to less than 20,000. Some barracks were left empty. The names on the lists were crossed out with red ink. Those who still worked did so with slow movements. None ran. None sang. A German wrote on the wall, "Neither cold nor pain, only waiting." Another wrote under his bed, "I have endured 3 winters." In 1947, rumors about repatriation circulated. Some were called by name. They were given bread, a coat, and a notebook with instructions. The others watched from afar. Some cried. Others remained motionless. They did not know if the departure was real. Some of those selected died before the journey. One left his spoon wrapped in a sock. Another handed his blanket to a comrade and said, "You will use it more." When the train departed, those remaining watched from the fence. The locomotive moved away without making a sound. In the carriage, one wrote with his finger on the fogged glass, "Goodbye." Behind them remained those who would never be called. The ground remained hard, the wind just as cold, the lines formed as always. The count kept going down. In the first months of 1948, a new list of prisoners to be sent back was organized. The Soviets did not explain the criteria. Some had been working in quarries for years. Others could barely walk. They were given a jacket with intact buttons, a little soap, and a bag with bread. The journey was made on trains similar to those that had taken them years before, but this time there were fewer men per carriage. During the journey, the prisoners did not know if they were truly going home. There was talk of intermediate stations, interrogations, or transfers to other camps. Some men slept with bread hidden in their clothes. Others spoke for the first time in weeks. A German soldier said he no longer remembered his last name. Another asked if his village still existed. Uncertainty filled every stop. Upon reaching the border, the men were brought down and formed into lines. A Soviet officer read the names. Then an Allied officer received them. They were offered hot food, some clean clothes, and a sheet to sign. Some could not write. They used a cross. 6 years had passed since their capture. Most weighed less than 50 kilograms. Many had chronic diseases. Some died days after being liberated. Those who remained in the camps formed a group called the Forgotten Ones. None knew when they would leave. Some still retained energy. Others remained silent. A prisoner noted on a piece of wood how many trains had departed without him. When he reached 20, he stopped counting. The tasks continued. The food did not vary. On one occasion, a rumor of repatriation was celebrated. It turned out to be false. They only transferred the terminally ill to another barrack. In 1950, the Soviets reported that more than 10,000 German prisoners still remained. Many were in distant camps, to the north or in industrial areas. They worked in factories, mines, dams. Some learned Russian. Others were used as translators or mechanics. In one camp, a locomotive repair workshop was set up. It was led by a former German engineer who slept on a wooden bench. In another camp, the prisoners were responsible for cutting firewood. They used old saws without protection. One man lost 3 fingers. They treated him with wet bandages. He did not return to work. Some tried to write letters to their families. Only a few received a reply. The letters were short, with phrases like, "I am still breathing," or "I remember you." The envelopes arrived torn. Pages were missing. Some of those who survived so many years were put to the test by the Soviets. They were offered to stay in Russian territory in exchange for a salary and better conditions. Few accepted. Most preferred to return. A German officer rejected the offer and was sent to a barrack without heating. He died in winter. His name was crossed off the list with black ink. Nobody occupied his bed. By the end of 1952, the last mass transfers began to be organized. The prisoners were called by number. Lines formed slowly. Some needed help to walk. They were given documents with Russian symbols, a bag with dry food, and a jacket without insignia. It was forbidden to carry letters or mementos. A prisoner hid a folded photograph in the lining of his cap. During the journey, the guards remained silent. The trains advanced without long stops. At the stations, Russian civilians were seen looking from afar. Some threw bread, others spat. The soldiers did not react. They remained silent. On one stretch, a convoy stopped for several hours. A German wrote on the wagon wall, "It is not the end yet." Nobody contradicted him. Upon reaching Allied-controlled territory, registration was organized. Names, fingerprints were taken, and a medical examination was conducted. Most of the men had problems with their lungs, skin, or bones. Some were blind in one eye. Others had scars on their faces. A British doctor said that many looked older than 70, even though they were barely 35. Transit centers were set up where the newcomers were fed and cleaned. Photographs were taken of them for the archives. Some refused to be photographed. They felt shame. One soldier covered his face with his hand. Another asked to be registered only as a man, without military rank. At a repatriation center, a man believed to be dead since 1943 was found. His family no longer lived in his house. He had to start from scratch. Many of the liberated chose not to return to their cities. Some stayed in friends' houses or in new towns. They changed their names. They avoided talking about Stalingrad. They kept silent about what they had experienced. Some took years to explain that they had been prisoners. One of them wrote in his diary, "They ask me why I am silent. I ask why they forget." His notebook was found in a market decades later. The last prisoners of the battle were liberated in 1955, more than 1 decade after the combat. They were allowed to return after political negotiations. There was little recognition. No one organized ceremonies or parades. They returned in silence. Their names were read in offices. They were given a passport, some money, and a temporary address. Some cried upon receiving a cup of hot coffee. Soviet records revealed that of the 91,000 men who surrendered in Stalingrad, barely 5,000 returned. The rest died in the camps, on the trains, or during the marches. Many never had a grave. Their remains were left under the snow, in forests, or beside forgotten roads. In Germany, some families continued waiting for letters that never arrived. Others received telegrams years later. In certain towns, former prisoners were received with distrust. Some were considered traitors. Others were ignored. The war had continued without them. The country had changed. Some did not recognize the streets. One man wrote that his house was a new building. His old street no longer existed. Another found his wife married to another man. He decided to move to another district. Those who survived did so with physical and mental sequelae. Many suffered from insomnia, tremors, or nightmares. One would write numbers on his arm out of habit. Another would wake up shouting orders. Some would gather in parks in silence. They shared bread, coffee, or cigarettes. In Berlin, a group founded an association without a name. They met once a month. They only spoke of what they remembered with certainty. The rest they left out. Over the years, books, photos, and testimonies emerged, but many former prisoners decided to remain silent. They refused interviews. They said their words were useless. One said that the living do not understand the cold of the dead. Another donated his old uniform to a museum and asked to remain anonymous. According to him, names no longer mattered. Some of the camps where they were destroyed. Others became factories. A group of students visited one in 1982. They found rusty nails, pieces of spoon, and engraved wood. They wore gloves. They took photos. They wrote their names on frozen ground. They said they would make a report. It was never known if they published it. In the last official count, more than 80,000 German dead were recognized after the surrender in Stalingrad. The figure remains open. Many documents were lost. Some lists were incomplete. Several bodies remained unidentified. It is only known that thousands crossed the Volga line in February of 1943 and disappeared. Their remains stayed among snow, mud, and silence.